In this video I'm going to be continuing my series in which the goal is to build a Pokerbot. And from the previous videos you'll know that there's basically three parts to creating a Pokerbot. We need first the counterfactual regret minimization algorithm. That's what I did in the previous couple videos. In this video we're going to do the second part, which is creating an abstraction of the game, because it turns out that the game of poker is way too large to run CFR on directly. So first we have to basically map the game, the full game of poker, to a smaller game. So that'll be like taking a single flop or taking like a bunch of flops and then mapping that to a single node in a game tree. And then the third part, after we do that, it turns out that when you do run CFR on the abstraction part, the abstraction of the game, the strategies you get are still not very good. But what is good is the expected values of those nodes. And so in the third part, we use those EVs of the nodes in real time to do what's called subgame solving, which will then come up with the actual strategies for what the final bot is going to be playing. And we'll do that in a later video. And so in this video, I'm going to go over just abstractions in general, and then I'll also talk a bit about a specific technique called potential aware abstractions, which I think is still like the most cutting edge way of doing it. And it's also kind of interesting because it can be applied to all sorts of games, not just poker. So I'm going to start with just a quick overview of k-means clustering. I'm going to be using the term clustering and bucketing kind of interchangeably. And so basically the idea is that you have your data points, which here are actually just points on a plane, so just an x and a y, but that can be that can be a vector. Your data can be vectors of as many elements as you need. So like you can have one element that says like whether there's a flush draw on the flop, like the high card could be another one, the low card could be another. You can just add as many elements to your vectors that you want. And then you run this k-means algorithm on it. And essentially the way that works is you give the algorithm how many clusters you want to group your data into. So you need to feed it a lot of data points. So for poker that would be like you would just run through a lot of flops and you would create feature vectors for the individual hands on those flops, and each hand would be a feature vector. And then you'd feed that into the algorithm and you'd say like I want like 10,000 clusters or whatever it is. And then what the algorithm does is it essentially will find, if you want, like in this example there's 3 clusters, so it will find 3 points, which you can see here are the red stars, and they're called the centroids. And then when it finds those, then the way you tell which cluster any single data point belongs in is you just do a distance function, and whatever the closest centroid is to that data point is what cluster it belongs in. And so I think it's conceptually pretty simple, and you can apply this in anything. This is like a broad machine learning thing. There's nothing specific to poker in this exactly. So I've been working on my own feature vectors and then running bucketing on them just to get a kind of broad sense of what's possible. And this is just like the most simple first attempt at an abstraction. It's not the more complicated techniques I'm going to talk about later in the video. But I started with just trying to reach like 30,000 buckets on the flop and just see like how fine grained that could get. And I really was surprised at how little information you're actually allowed to use, basically. Like I thought that I would be able to incorporate information about like blockers and things that like humans think is important, but I think the game tree is just so big that you just can't do it. So like here, and this is kind of a hand wavy example, but like I just imagined like, imagine there's some properties that justify playing a hand differently. Then each time that you come across one of those properties, you're going to have to split your abstraction. You're going to have to double the amount of info sets, basically. And you can really only do that like a couple times because it starts growing exponentially. So here I decided that if you have only like 2,000 roughly unique flops, like that feels like a lot, but when you actually break it down, it's not. Like if you split by like the top card on the flop, I've been calling this like bunchiness for like how the distribution of the cards, basically, for whether a straight's possible or like a straight draw in the middle of the board. Just a roughly static or dynamic, basically whether there's like straight draws and flush draws possible. and things like that. Once you add a couple of those things, you're already at 2,000. And then if you want to reach 30,000 info sets on the flop, which is what they used in one of the papers that I've been following, and it seems like a reasonable number that you could actually solve using just like normal hardware, where you don't need like a billion terabytes to solve the thing. So yeah, so once you have the 2,000 flop buckets, you can only have like 13 hand groupings on the flop before you're already at 30,000. And so like 13 hand groupings, it's really not a lot. And it's even less, I think, than like I originally thought, because each info set, it has to justify playing a hand differently. So you can't just say like this is like your medium value hands. You actually have to split it by like the hands that bet and then fold when they face a raise. And then there's also the hands that bet, and then when they get raised, they then make a small raise versus a small 3-bet, and then some make a big 3-bet or whatever. And then there's the hands that then fold once there's a jam over the top, and then there's the hands that call. And like already, just for like that like medium value range, you're already at like a whole bunch of hands, a whole bunch of groupings. So only having 13 for the entire flop is like, it's pretty crazy. Like everything's just kind of merged together, and that's actually kind of it. Basically answered one of the main questions I had when I started this project, which was like, why are these abstractions, the strategies that you use when you solve the abstraction, why are they so bad? Because like it really just seemed like I thought like maybe it's because they were playing against professionals, and like but the strategy from the abstracted game would actually do pretty well against a normal person. But it turns out that's just not true. Like you just have to bucket stuff together to such an extent that like you kind of, it's going to be playing like nonsense, but and so that's really why like all you really get out of the solution to the abstracted game is the good expected values for the nodes. And here's a slide from one of Noam Brown's recent talks. Noam Brown is the guy who created the bot that beat the first top-level humans. And this is just showing the diminishing returns you get when you increase the size of the abstraction. You can see here that he went from 2,000 to 200,000 buckets, and there's like barely any improvement on the quality of the strategy that you find when you solve the abstracted game. And the point of his talk is he was basically saying that you should focus on the subgame solving portion, and that's where the real win came from. And so for that reason, I think I'm probably going to stick with just the most simple thing that I can do, because I think it's just probably not that important compared to other things that we can do. But with that said, I still am going to go over the potential aware abstraction technique, because I think it's kind of cool, even if it's probably not that important in terms of coming up with a winning bot. And so, yeah, I mean, this kind of makes sense. It's kind of like with Monte Carlo search. It's a technique where in a game you have both players just making completely random moves. And then the idea is if one player wins more often, even though they were making completely random moves, it means that there's something inherent to that position that is better than the other player's position. And you're basically doing the same thing when you solve an abstraction. Like the strategies that you get are going to be junk, but it will tell you whether it's good to be at a certain node or not, and then you need to use that information in the end game solving. So with potential aware abstractions, the idea actually goes back to like 2009, 2008 or something like that, when they were first making bots that were playing a limit hold'em. And at first what they were doing is they were just using or their first guess was to just use the equity of a hand to do bucketing. And the equity is basically just the percent of the time that a hand is going to win versus all the other players' hands if you completely stop any betting and you just check to the river, basically. That's the way to think about it. And they realized right away that even though hands can have similar equity, they would still need to be played differently because they have a different distribution of equities versus the different hands in the range. So you can see that in this like chart here. These histograms, you see that pocket fours and 10-jack suited both have really similar equities, but their distribution is completely different. So like pocket fours has like more of this center mass where it's like pocket fours beating overcards basically, and then at the very far right it makes sets, whereas 10-jack suited it's going to make more top pairs that win, and then it also has some potential to make really strong hands with flushes and straights. And then the same thing with sixes and queen, king. And so what they decided to do is, instead of just using a single value for the equity, is they came up with this idea called like opponent cluster strength or something like that. And the idea is, instead of looking at the equity versus the entire range, you basically make like a feature vector where each element is the equity you have versus a portion of the range. So like for a single hand, say we have pocket fours, we would look at how 4-4 does against all these hands in yellow, which would be like, you know, whatever that is, 3-2 offsuit or whatever. And so it looks like this one has 8 different elements. So this would be a feature vector of length 8. And then what they did is they would then generate all sorts of points by just iterating through all the hands and lots of different flops. And then they ran clustering on top of that. And so that gives you kind of like a more sense, like a clustering that makes sense. Like if you go strictly by equity, then you're going to end up with like hands that are really in a different class that just happen to have similar hand strength. Like it'll group like 3 of a kind with like a flush, like a low flush. So your worst flush and your best 3 of a kind will like get mixed together. But if you do it in this way, you guarantee that they're going to end up in different clusters, because the distribution is going to be different on how they do versus the different groupings of hands. And this is kind of interesting because the hand groupings that you pick are actually kind of arbitrary, but it just doesn't really matter so long as you have enough of them. And so at this point, you have this is all they actually needed in order to make the bots that were beating humans at limit hold'em before they even solved the game outright. So this goes all the way back to like 2008 or something like that. And so this is actually pretty effective. And potential aware abstractions improves on this by, instead of having a feature vector, like here this is for 4-4, it has these different numbers which are the equities versus these different groupings on the river. What we do is, so this would be its vector no matter which street we're looking at, whether we're on the flop or turn or river. And instead what we do is we make a feature vector where, say, like the first element will be, instead of how you do on the river against a certain grouping of hands, it's the probability that you're going to end up in a specific bucket on the next street. So on the turn, it'll be like the probability you end up in bucket 1 will be in element 1 of the feature vector. And in element 2, it'll be like the here, so I did this. So like the first element in your feature vector for pocket fours on the turn is going to be the probability that you land in bucket 1 on the river. And then the second element is going to be the probability you end up in bucket 2, etc. And you do that, and then that's going to be your feature vector. And the way you actually work this out is you first have to just generate all this value, generate all these feature vectors for random hands, and then you run clustering on it. So in a sense, you actually have to be generating these feature vectors before you even know which turn bucket it's going to go into. But then after you run this algorithm and you have all your turn buckets, you then do the same thing from the flop. So then your feature vectors on the flop are the probability you're going to land in bucket 1 on the turn and bucket 2 on the turn, etc. And when you do this, the abstraction, it's like taking in, the reason it's called potential aware is because it's basically telling you like you might end up in a bad spot on the turn, but there's still this probability that you have a really good hand on the river or whatever, and it kind of groups hands together based on that type of thing instead of these explicit kind of things that I would figure out, like whether there's a flush draw or whatever. And the way this works is all it takes into account is this the river distribution. And so it actually doesn't have to know anything about poker specifically. And so this is the way this works, and it's actually, like, it seems like it would work really well, but it's actually a little bit more complicated because you have to, the distance metric between your feature vectors, because you need to know a distance in order to figure out which bucket you go into. It's not just Euclidean distance, like the obvious kind. You have to do Earth mover's distance, which basically means you have to look up in a table the distance between the different buckets. And so it's kind of like looking at this guy, like here we have these really strong hands in group 7 and weak hands in 1. And so you'd want to be able to take that into account. You don't just want to look at the Euclidean distance and think about each element as like its own, orthogonal dimension. Like there's actually meaning between the different values. And it then gets more complicated because the actual algorithm for Earth mover's distance is really slow. And so in the paper, they go over a way to kind of approximate it. It's kind of like a greedy algorithm. It's not really that complicated, but all these things kind of add up, and it seems like, for me, I think it's just not worth implementing this or really caring too much about it. And it can also get really slow because, like, say, starting at the flop, if you want to figure out which bucket you're in on the flop, you have to iterate through all the different turns in order to get your turn vector. But in order to figure out which buckets you're on the turn, you also have to iterate to the river so that you can get your river buckets, because your turn vector is made up of the distribution that you're going to end up on the river. And so like there's this thing where like it gets really, really slow. And that was actually one of the main motivations for me diving into the different lookup table stuff that I did in another video, because I realized that this was just way too slow to use during counterfactual regret minimization. And so, yeah, I mean, basically what I'm thinking now is I'm just not going to touch the potential aware abstraction stuff, because I think just from like looking at that graph with the diminishing returns and stuff, I think it's probably just not worth it. And if it ever becomes a thing, I can always come back to it, because it's not actually that hard to implement, I don't think. If you can look at the pseudocode on this, in the actual paper, it's pretty straightforward. And there's also like implementations on GitHub and stuff. Although I noticed that one guy said that he like published it and put it up, but he said that he didn't know if it actually worked because it was too computationally expensive to run it, which is kind of the same conclusion I came to, which I thought was kind of a good sign. And so yeah, I think I'm going to call this video now, and I guess the next video is going to be probably about the subgame solving stuff, which is pretty complicated, and it's probably going to take me a couple months to get there, so I'll see you then.